This is the new 2025 Bentley Continental GT, and it's an all-new, fully redesigned version of Bentley's entry-level car. I mock entry-level because this now has a starting price of over $300,000, which is massive, but it also has 770 horsepower and, of course, a lot of other great stuff. Today, I'm going to review the brand new Continental GT, and I'll show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. Cars and Bids has around 600,000 registered users, all participating in our auctions of cool, special, exciting cars like this, and this, and this, and this. If you're looking to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era, do it on carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new, fully redesigned 4th generation Bentley Continental GT. Although I will say you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is just an update and maybe even a slight one to the old car. The design looks relatively unchanged. Certainly the profile, the overall shape looks like the Bentley Continental GT look we've come to know for now more than 20 years. But especially this version, it doesn't necessarily look like a brand new redesigned car, and yet Bentley says it is. But to Bentley's credit, there are quite a few changes to this car compared to the old one, and the biggest is under the hood. The old twin-turbo W12 is gone. The 12-cylinder no longer offered in this car. Instead, the top dog engine is this one. It's a twin-turbo plug-in hybrid V8 that makes an astonishing 770 horsepower. That's a huge figure, although this engine isn't just Bentley. It's shared with the Porsche Panamera Turbo E hybrid something or other, although it's worth pointing out it does have a Bentley oil cap. As you can see, a little Bentley heritage under the hood. Now, this Continental GT, equipped with this engine, is the speed trim level, high performance, and indeed, it's quick, 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. But because it's a plug-in hybrid, it also has about 25 miles of fully electric driving before the gasoline engine has to kick in. So it can be efficient too. Now, the new Continental GT speed starts around $305,000, although this particular model is optioned and equipped up to a $390,000 sticker price. That's this car. That's big money. Now, it's worth pointing out that on previous Continental GT models, the speed has been a top trim level with ultra high performance, and that will probably be the case here too. For now, the speed is the only model available, but I expect that soon an entry-level Continental GT will join with lower pricing and less power than the speed's 771 horses. So, what does the Continental GT give us? Well, on the outside, like I said, the design is fairly similar compared to the outgoing model. I would never guess this was a full redesign, but apparently it is. One big way to tell apart the new Continental GT from the old one is the headlights. There's now an eyelash, as you can see, this sort of flat horizontal piece coming off the circular center of the headlight. That's one of the new design touches in this car. The new Continental GT also has this big accentuated hip line on the back. This has always been a Continental GT hallmark, but I feel like now it's even wider, even bigger, even more obvious than before, and frankly, I think it looks pretty nice. Now, around back, a couple of other interesting things worth mentioning. For one, you still got the oval taillights. This has been a characteristic Bentley Continental GT touch since it first debuted more than 20 years ago, and they are still carried on to this, the 4th generation model. Now, another distinctive element of this car is that it's got a lot of Bentley logos and Bentley scripts writing all around telling you that it's a Bentley, and and some of them even do stuff. For example, the Bentley logo on the trunk is not just a logo. You press the center of it, the B, and it's also the trunk popper. Push it and the trunk automatically opens up. Take another look, press the B, and the trunk opens. Now you get into this trunk and you can see it's a pretty standard cargo area for a vehicle like this. Not too big, not too small, pretty much exactly what you'd expect to see in a luxury coupe. Although one interesting feature in here is this little leather Bentley box. You open this up and discover that this car comes with little leather holders for the key fob that match the car itself, which is a luxury touch you probably don't get on your Mazda CX-5. Now, speaking of the key fob, you can see it's a missed opportunity to make the Bentley B logo do something. Instead, it's just a logo. All of the actual buttons are over on the other side where you can lock, unlock, open the trunk, and do all of the usual stuff. On the subject of the Bentley logo doing stuff, probably the most dazzling and prominent Bentley logo comes when you open the door. The puddle lamp is this Bentley logo, and not just a logo, but it's full color and it's glistening. Yes, look closely and you can see it sort of glistens as you look at it. Little parts of it kind of light up and twinkle for a minute. And again, not just black and white color, really accentuating the fact that you got a Bentley every time you open the door in the dark. But anyway, next up we move inside the new Continental GT. First thing you notice when you open the door is the door sill. Bentley is illuminated, looking very nice, and again reminding you what you're getting into. You can also see First Edition is printed here, and that's because this is not just a Continental GT Speed, but it is a First Edition model. The First Edition package includes, I guess, a lot of high quality trim and upgrades, and it costs $50,000, which is part of the reason this car is so much more expensive at $390 grand than its $305,000 base price, the expensive First Edition. But anyway, you climb inside and you are quickly greeted by an interior that has a lot of very high quality upscale touches, as you might imagine. For instance, on the door panel, these little like folds, they're like mountains on the door panel that definitely add to the experience more than your traditional plastic or cloth. Above that, you have this machined finish, which is beautiful, and that carries over to the dashboard. You can see this sort of machined aluminum, these half circles, which just look so cool and so high quality and luxurious. Beyond that, you got perforated leather and high quality stitching in all sorts of colors everywhere you look. It is very nice trim and materials inside this car. And check out this mood lighting, this thin little strip of light that goes all throughout the interior. Naturally, you can change the color of this light, which is very cool. And also, it just frankly looks cool. It adds to the panache, the mood, the vibe inside this interior. But with that said, I have noticed this car has some lesser qualities in the interior as well that I'm surprised to see in a Bentley, especially a new one at this price point. For instance, this center control area is all good and fine, except it looks like it's primarily plastic and relatively cheap plastic. All the buttons, the switches in here look plastic and don't feel very nice. And even though this car doesn't have much plastic basically anywhere else, this is a major focal point in the interior, and it's an area that you touch and look at very frequently. It's a bit disappointing. The infotainment system, I drove this car for quite a while, connected my phone with Apple CarPlay, and that only lasted for a little bit. About an hour and a half into a 5-hour drive, it shut off, couldn't get it to come back on, Bluetooth or wired. It was just done. And I got in the car this morning to come film this video, and I noticed a little plastic bit in the driver footwell. It was this. The hood latch had fallen off completely, which is surprising because up to that point, I hadn't even opened the hood to check the engine like I do in the videos. It just fell off. I guess I kicked it maybe, but to me, that shouldn't be happening in a Bentley. I fear a little bit that with Bentley's continued folding under the Volkswagen Group umbrella, they may be trying to cost cut, share parts with other Volkswagen Group models. Porsches, Audis, nice cars, but not necessarily Bentleys. Bentleys, and some of those things make me wonder if this car really has the stately, high-quality feel that I've come to expect from a Bentley. Now, with that said, there are some very nice things and some interesting quirks and features in this car beyond just the materials. For instance, the start-stop button in this center console, that looks and feels cool, and it's surrounded by this rather beautiful, weighty dial that allows you to change the drive mode of the car, which is pretty neat. Now, directly next to that, you have the gear selector, and here's another example of the Bentley logo doing something. To switch gears, you have to push down on the Bentley B, and only then can you change between reverse, neutral, and drive, which is kind of a clever touch as well. Going over to the door panel, climb inside the car, and the second you shut the door, this little motorized piece delivers you the seatbelt automatically, which is nice to see. Once you put the seatbelt on, the little motorized piece goes right back into its home, ready to do its job later. And speaking of this area, here's a cool feature. This button allows you to control all the windows at once. Press that and then roll down a window and they all go down at the same time. So if you want that cool open air feel inside your car, you don't have to individually roll down the windows. That button lets you do it at once. I love that feature and I wish more cars had it. And another cool touch inside this car, in the gauge cluster, you have night vision. You can scroll over, this is night vision. It's using heat to show you what's in front of you, what's going on while you drive. This is a surprisingly useful feature. I owned a car with this, and on rural roads where deer or people, bicyclists might be out, it's dark, this can be shockingly useful to use. I wish more cars had it, but it's nice to see it here. And another cool and clever touch, a Bentley hallmark at this point, the center screen. You can see it's just a screen, but if you press this button marked screen, this whole panel rotates and delivers you this machined aluminum piece with 3 beautiful gauges on it. I guess if you want to drive around in your Bentley enjoying the beauty of the craftsmanship, that's what you'd put on in place of the screen. Of course, you want to go back to the screen to adjust something, just press the button again, it rotates right back, and then your screen display has reappeared, and you can switch between the two all the time. Maybe the most interesting thing though is when you go to turn off the car, it rotates a different direction and a third panel appears. This one is just the machined aluminum finish, no gauges or screen. And so there are 3 different levels of panel that can be in the center control stack depending on the car's status or your preference, which is a nice luxury touch. But anyway, let's go back to that screen and let's talk screen for a minute. Now, here's another little drawback of this car. The infotainment system is basically lifted straight from Porsche and Audi. Now, that's probably a good thing. Bentley developed infotainment technology probably isn't as good as one automaker working together to share the tech with all of its brands, but it definitely doesn't feel as bespoke as you might imagine, since it's exactly what you'd get in a Porsche or an Audi, just sort of Bentleyized a little bit. Now, with that said, it is a good system, at least when it's working, when Apple CarPlay isn't turning off. CarPlay and Android Auto are standard, again, when they're working, but you also have some other cool features, like the camera system is excellent in this car, including a 3D camera that's very easy to use, sensitive, intuitive, and it can help you if you're trying to park in tight spaces. It's excellent to see that. One other nice touch with this infotainment system, I like the fact that it has physical buttons down below the system in order to switch between some commonly used items, like the home screen, the back button, navigation, phone. All of these are obviously available in the screen, or you can use the physical buttons below in case you're getting lost and you just want to button out of your screen. That is actually a pretty cool idea. But while the center screen is pretty good, the gauge cluster screen is excellent. I've already shown you the night vision, but beyond that, I love the fact that you can pretty easily scroll between various different information displays showing trip odometer, the map, the music you're listening to, and you can make it bigger or smaller depending on exactly what you want. It's very configurable in terms of the display and the sizing, which I really like to see. This also is technology borrowed from Audi and other Volkswagen Group models. It functions about the same, and maybe it's not as bespoke or special Bentley, but it just works well, and that's nice to see. Now, above the gauge cluster screen, you also have a heads-up display, which obviously projects even more information directly on the road ahead of you, so you don't have to move at all for the basics that are in your heads-up. Now, in this area, I should also mention mention the adaptive cruise control system. This car has this little cruise control stalk coming off of the steering wheel, and I gotta say, the adaptive cruise doesn't really work all that well. It will speed up and slow down based on the speed of the car in front of you, but it's really lazy to do it. When the car in front of you changes lanes, it just sort of takes its time to speed up, which isn't really great when you have a lot of aggressive drivers around kind of jockeying for position. And even on the closest setting to being right behind the car in front of you, it's still pretty far back, which means if you're sitting in the left lane, people think you're just a slow car and they're always passing you. I think that this adaptive cruise system could definitely stand to be more aggressive. I'm sure they toned it down because it's a Bentley and it's stately and luxurious, but frankly, that just means it doesn't really work like you'd want it to. And finally, let's talk back seat in the Continental GT. Pretty easy to access. This lever on the side of the front seat, you just pull it forward, and then you can move the front seat forward with this arrow button. Just push it and the seat rolls forward, and then you get into the back. Now, the back seat in this car is not big. If you want a real back seat, you get the Flying Spur sedan. This one is there just for the occasional use, but it is there and it's pretty nice. You have two individual seats back here, one on each side, no center seat, and you have the same luxuries that you had up front, and that means the perforated leather on the seat, high quality contrast stitching. Everything looks and feels good back here, and you still have the same nice mood lighting. That little thin strip carries into the back, same like it did up front. You even have individual rear windows in back. As you can see, little window switches back here, so even the rear passengers can roll up or down their window. That's not just the purview of the driver. That's pretty cool. You don't often see that in coupes, but when they're luxurious like this, I guess you do. So some nice benefits in back, and yet one rather unfortunate drawback. This panel will not roll back like it's supposed to. I can't get it to roll into place so I can see what's under it. Another kind of questionable level of Bentley quality. Kind of makes you wonder exactly what's going on in these Volkswagen Bentley days. But with that in mind, you're probably wondering what it's like to drive this car, the V8 replacing the W12. Let's find out. All right, driving the new Continental GT Speed, and I gotta say, I was a big fan of the old W12. That was my favorite powertrain. Honestly, one of my favorite engines in the entire car biz ever. I loved the old twin-turbo Bentley W12. This powertrain makes an enormous amount of horsepower, and it gives an incredible acceleration, but it ain't the W12. It actually comes closer than I was expecting it to. Plug-in hybrid turbo V8, I thought there's no way you could ever equal the W12, and you can't really. That engine just built power in such an all-consuming, torquey, luxury muscle car kind of way. But this engine does a good job also. It still has great mid-range, which is one thing I loved about the W12. It still has a great sound to it, not over the top, but very kind of luxurious, powerful. And it still gives you a really excellent acceleration. In fact, obviously significantly better acceleration than the W12. But the problem is this engine is just a little bit peakier. Like when you floor it and it goes high in the rev range and it feels almost more like a sports car. The W12 gave you sports car acceleration but still managed to feel like a luxury car, whereas this engine is just a little bit more frenetic. And the reason that was so great in the W12 was it's a Bentley. You don't want a frenetic powertrain. You want something that can really just like get up and go while still swathing you in luxury. And this engine gets up and goes in a lot of great ways, but it doesn't swath you in luxury. Like it has the sort of peaky power band that most powerful engines do. Now, other than that with this car, there's a lot to like here, although I'm not as obsessively in love with this car as I expected to be, especially considering a $400,000 price point. I actually spent a lot of time in this car. I drove this car from San Diego to Los Angeles and back to film the Smoking Tire podcast with Matt Farah, and I was in this car for 5 hours that day, plus I've been driving it around quite a bit since. And my general takeaway is that it's very nice, and it's got some great features and some great luxury, but I just feel like the 05 Continental GT, and especially the older Arnages, just had this solidity, this feel of solidity that the modern car has, but not quite as much. And that feel of solidity helped to justify the very expensive price tag then, which has risen to become even more expensive, even when you account for inflation. Now, to be clear, the car is still an immense luxury car. You have a great insulation feeling from the world around. Like you can't hear anything going on out there. But I do feel like you get a little bit more drama in this car, a little bit more tire noise than I was expecting. There's a little bit of wind rush that comes through the window at highway speeds. I get the sense that Volkswagen Group, in this attempt to kind of cost cut and parts share, has maybe dumbed down the Bentleys a bit. By doing all that, the cars have lost a little bit of the soul of what makes them these special brands. And I certainly feel that in this car. It has the feel of a Bentley, but I drove an Arnage last night, and that car just had this exotic solidity that like was totally unknown in the regular car world that's kind of missing from this vehicle. Now, a couple of other interesting things. Number one, this car is surprisingly athletic. You do lose some of that big body luxury car feel that you think you might get from a luxury car, but I think people who are going after the Continental GT, a sort of sleek coupe, and specifically the speed model, the high performance version, if you will, they're okay with that. They're okay with losing some of that kind of luxury car feel. The car is not maybe what I would entirely expect as a ultra high-end luxury car, and yet it now costs more than it ever has before. So I feel like I loved the Continental GT in 05 when it came out, and it was tremendously popular initially. We've gone a little bit away from that. The car has gotten a lot more expensive. It hardly feels like an entry-level car anymore, and yet it's lost some of its sort of Bentleyness and Bentley charm. Nonetheless, it is still a very impressive, very excellent car with very fine materials and acceleration and power and performance and style. And there's a lot of absolutely wonderful things to like and love about this car, but I still look back to the original Continental GT and its ethos and how that car delivered what it was versus this car, and I see some benefits. This car is more athletic, it's obviously higher tech, and even at the time, the 05 Continental GT was not as high tech as its peers. This is, but maybe you lose some of the Bentleyness. You do still get a beautifully designed, beautifully styled car that is absolutely fantastic to be a part of. You're just paying big, big bucks for it. And so that's the new 2025 Bentley Continental GT Speed. This is an impressive car with some impressive features, styling, performance, but $390,000 is a massive price tag. Then again, all the exotic stuff is crazy money these days, and this car has some great qualities to help justify the price tag. Anyway, now it's time to give the new Continental GT Speed a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 68 out of 100, which puts the Continental GT here against rivals. It's near the top of the heap, which makes sense because this car is wonderfully competent and high quality in a lot of ways. But it's right on par with the outgoing Continental, which frankly also makes sense because honestly, this car just isn't all that different. The Continental GT is a good car, it always has been, but it's not a radical improvement over the old model. It's just a continuation of the same great stuff that's made this luxury performance coupe great for almost 20 years.